Billy Blue, my knight in shining brindle. Welcome to another episode of A Poet Reads to Write. You've caught me today just after I've returned home from making another plasma donation with the blood bank. So I've been up in the Blue Mountains with Mum and Dad so that Mum could look after my Billy Blue while I went to the blood bank. And I've just returned home. Mum gave me, as part of my Christmas birthday treat, she gave me a day out in Penrith. So I went to a really nice cafe for lunch and I was able to get around to a few bookshops and sort of enjoy a little bit of time away on my own. I must admit, I found it a bit hard to leave Billy and to go, but Mum insisted she'd bought me something special, so I went. While I was in Penrith, I was able to get to a couple of bookshops and I bought a few things that I'm really excited about. You can see this one by Paul Kriwaczek, A History of Babylon. I've always been madly in love with the ancient Near East, you know, what we would now call ancient Iran and ancient Iraq. So the civilizations of Sumer, Babylon, the Assyrians, the Persians, this is just an area, a time of history that has always caught my attention. I've always dreamed of one day getting to the, British Library, British Museum, and looking at all those wonderful clay tablets with all that ancient cuneiform, the ancient script of the ancient Near East, the Mesopotamian, as the Greeks called it, the Mesopotamian world. So Babylon is one of those things that is such a treat for me. I just love it. So I can't wait to get into this sort of cultural history of ancient Babylon. I also bought this book. I've just recently lent a couple of my Søren Kierkegaards to someone who I don't think I'm going to get them back from. And if I do get them back, they're going to be a little bit damaged. They're pretty rough with books. So I have this, I saw this at the bookshop and I decided to get it to complete my Søren Kierkegaard collection again. Kierkegaard is just a continental philosopher who I've always loved. He's one of these guys who really meditated on angst, depression, anxiety. But at the same time, amidst all that anxiety, he was determined to keep his faith. And his Christian faith was a really important part of who he was as a human being. It was central to his way of being in the world. I've always loved Kierkegaard, his philosophy, his writings, under all those pseudonyms. I just love. And I probably will make a video on Søren Kierkegaard sometime in the near future, now that I've got this and replaced the copy that I lent out. So Søren Kierkegaard, a marvelous continental philosopher of that sort of late 19th century. Then I also bought this book by Paul Ham, The Soul, A History of the Human Mind. So sort of going back to those dualities of mind-body or mind and brain, and, looking at the mind as maybe another way of looking at the soul. This is going to be a really interesting book. Paul Ham, I think, I've never read anything by him before, but I think he's sort of a popular historian. He's written on a range of different topics like World War I and Gallipoli and all sorts of things. So I am really looking forward. This is a subject, of course, that I find totally magnetic. I'm so drawn to this type of philosophy, this type of cultural history. So I can't wait to read this, spend time with it, and just see what I can make of it. I'm pretty sure it will be a real blast of a read. I'm really looking forward to it. Then I also bought, while I was down there, the latest novel of Haruki Murakami. Jenny from Jenny Jables and Emily from the Linguist Library. I promise, when I read this book, I will keep to the forefront of my brain, I will keep your critique of Murakami's representation of gender. I know that I can't just give myself to the world that Murakami creates and all the richness of allusion to musical and literary written cultures. I know, as well as getting caught up in the magic and the mystery of the whole thing, I need to keep that interrogation of his representation of gender. So you have instructed me. I will read this book differently. For me, I don't think you can really understand magic realism, which is a genre that I love, like fantasy. Magic realism is a genre I am very drawn to. And I don't think you could really understand magic realism in that late 20th century into the 21st century milieu without looking at Haruki Murakami. I think he's that important. Plus, I'm not a fan of book banning at all. And of course, I'm not a fan really of cancel culture either. I don't mind people who have decided not to read Murakami, because of that representation, his difficulties in representing gender. Whether that's to do with his traditional Japanese belief systems, I don't know. I haven't looked into that enough. And it wasn't really a thing that I was all that aware of before really watching Emily and Jenny on BookTube with Murakami's representation of gender. So I know I need to do better. I'm not a great fan of cancel culture, I guess. I think all of us, particularly when you get to my age, I think all of us have bits best kept forgiven. So I'm not a great fan of cancel culture. I really want to read Murakami, but yes, I will keep at the forefront of my brain when I read him now that representation of gender and whether he does a good enough job at that. I think I can read the Murakami, but interrogate his representation of gender and keep that at the forefront. So we'll see how we go. And my goodness, isn't that a delicious cover? It is a beautiful cover. I love Murakami, so I am really looking forward to reading this book, particularly now that I've got Jenny and Emily in the background like Jiminy Cricket sitting on my shoulder telling me what I need to look out for, what I need to do to read this author better. Oh, and the other thing I bought while I was down there at the bookshops, Ian Colfer is a YA fantasy author that I've just always loved. He particularly wrote this Artemis Fowl universe, this multi-series novel world building up this character of Artemis Fowl. Artemis Fowl is sort of this comic, sly, almost hero / anti-hero. Is he a villain? Is he a hero? The way he interacts with the world, it's really interesting. And of course there are elves in this, and there's the whole lot of thing about magic, and Artemis spends a lot of his time collaborating with female people, elves. So I haven't read Artemis Fowl for a long time, but I'm really looking forward to getting back to it. And I bought all of these brand new paperbacks. They're only sort of cheap Penguin paperbacks, I guess, but they're beautiful colour. And I bought all 8 novels for only $40. So I was tickled pink to find this. I can't wait to reread all the Artemis Fowl books. I haven't read them for a long time. This is going to be an absolute hoot. All right. A few years ago, one of my lifelong dreams was to do the Indian Pacific. I grew up in the lower Blue Mountains, right next to the Great Western Highway and the railway line. So I was always watching the Indian Pacific go past on the railway line on the adventure from Sydney all the way to Perth, right across our great continent, from the Pacific Ocean to the Indian Ocean, or the other way if you're going from west to east. From a kid, one of my big dreams was to one day get on that train and to do the Indian Pacific from Sydney to Perth. And eventually, as an older person with a little bit more income and wealth built up, I was able to afford it. It's a luxury 5-day trip from coast to coast. And there are stop-offs and explorations and all sorts of things. I just had a blast. I've now done the Indian Pacific a few times. I loved it so much. Whenever I have a little sack of cash that I've saved up for a holiday, that's what I do. I can't do it now, of course, because I've got my Billy Blue and I just don't go anywhere without him. But this was before I had Billy. The last time I did the Indian Pacific, I decided, of course, what else? I decided to go with Agatha Christie's wonderful novel, Murder on the Orient Express. And then I also bought this other Agatha Christie. It's sort of a lovely little hardback that's got in it Death on the Nile, Towards Zero, and After the Funeral. So I took this with me, and while I was in the cafe, drinking coffee and whiskies and having an absolute ball, I was reading, while on this luxury train, Agatha Christie. These were terrific, but this was a particular hoot given the context of being on the Indian Pacific train. Of course, for me, I did laugh at myself, giggle at myself a little bit, because one of my big dreams was also to actually do the Orient Express. If I wasn't scared of flying, I would love to actually get a plane, go to London, spend a little bit of time exploring London, the British Library, the British Museum, of course, getting to Viking York. Oh boy, getting on a narrow boat and exploring some of the English and Welsh canals. And of course, my family heritage is part Jewish and part Scottish. My name should actually be Gordon Hall hyphenated, because the non-Jewish side of my family came from the Highlands of Scotland, and they were actually part of Clan Gordon. So I've always dreamed of returning one day and exploring the Highlands and exploring some of that terrain of where Clan Gordon is situated. It would be a great buzz for me, I think. And then, of course, I dreamed that I would get across the channel to Paris, get on the Orient Express, and make my way to the magnificent Istanbul. That would be a great dream. Oh boy, to finally get on the Orient Express and find myself approaching Istanbul. Byzantium, Constantinople, that city that is so rich in everyone's cultural history, this city that has to have three famous names: Istanbul, Byzantium, Constantinople. Oh my goodness. What a place. It'd be a great dream of mine to get that Orient Express from Paris and end up in Istanbul, sailing to Byzantium. Oh boy. Maybe one day. But when I did that last trip on the Indian Pacific, the Australian version of the Orient Express, when I last did that, of course, I had a ball reading Agatha Christie. I love her. I often watch Agatha Christie on TV with my mum and dad. Our mum and dad love sitting down with me and spending a night in front of the telly watching. And one of the things we particularly watch, of course, is British crime. And in particular, for mum and dad, that means Agatha Christie in all its manifestations. So I've spent many, many hours really enjoying watching Agatha Christie. But of course, for me, it is also a little bit of a pickle, because as the queen of crime, her understanding of crime was simply that of the moralist. You simply chose to do right or you chose to do wrong, wickedness. And crime for Agatha Christie is just about moral choice, isn't it? She had no understanding of sociology, of class, of socioeconomics, the causes of crime, situating crime into a bigger picture. It was just the glasses viewed at through the moralist's eyeglasses. And I love Agatha Christie. These are great. They're beautifully written. They're tremendous stories. I've had a blast spending hours and hours with mum and dad watching Agatha Christie. It's great fun. But I really do think you need to do, if you want to turn crime into entertainment, you do have a responsibility to really look at crime in its bigger, as a phenomenon, a social phenomenon, looking at it in terms of class and socioeconomics. I really do think you have a responsibility to do that. So the last time I went on the Indian Pacific and I was reading on my Agatha Christie, particularly this one, I came back and I got back into C.L.R. James. C.L.R. James was a wonderful Caribbean communist. He read Marx through the lens of Leon Trotsky. He's a really interesting cultural historian and commentator. He wrote a lot of fantastic books on the history of slave revolts in the Caribbean. And he also wrote this beautiful book on Caribbean cricket. It's a wonderful celebration of Caribbean cricket. Beyond a Boundary. This is a magnificent book. It's one of my favourite books of all time. You know, I've always loved Australian football, cricket. Cricket has always just been something, and particularly West Indian cricket. Oh boy, nothing better. So this is a magnificent celebration of cricket in the Caribbean, in the West Indies. But it's also using Beyond a Boundary to explore cricket and going beyond the cricket fence, that white picket fence, to explore, you know, how gender and race, class is represented. So this is a magnificent book on many levels. C.L.R. James also wrote a lot about crime, and he didn't mind using crime as entertainment. But for C.L.R. James, it was the responsibility of the crime writer to explore crime as what I was describing before, as social phenomenon, to get at those socio-economic, social causes, triggers, if you like, of crime, and to put crime, you know, to respond to crime or to look at crime as a complex social phenomenon with much more subtlety than what, for example, Agatha Christie is really capable of. So C.L.R. James then led me back to the other great British crime writer of the same era as Agatha Christie, the wonderful J.B. Priestley. So when I got back from that train trip the last time, I then spent a few months just returning to all my J.B. Priestley. He's an English, Yorkshireman, a veteran of the First World War, and then he came back and reinvented himself as a great writer. He wrote, 20 or 30 novels, plays, collections of essays, non-fiction, all sorts of things. The novel that he was probably most proud of is this one, Bright Day. This is a sort of a semi-autobiographical novel about a World War I veteran who returns with shell shock and trauma, living with that PTSD. And this young bloke is trying to, in the 1920s milieu, trying to reinvent himself as a playwright. So this is a book, there's a lot of angst, a lot of heartbreak, but it is also a beautiful book of resilience and of someone turning their lives around, transforming themselves into a writer. It's a beautiful book. I love it. A sort of a semi-autobiographical novel of Priestley's life. So this one isn't actually, I suppose, true crime in a sense, but it is a beautiful novel. It's the novel that J.B. Priestley always said he was most proud to have written. And then I've also got this wonderful collection of short stories. Several of these are traditional crime. And then I've also got this beautiful book by the great John Baxendale. John Baxendale wrote this beautiful book called Priestley's England. There's a lovely black and white photograph with the man holding his pipe. It's a beautiful book, this. This is sort of a cultural history of Priestley and of Priestley's place in the English literary milieu, if you like, and the making of films and all that sort of stuff. A decade or so ago now, when Dublin's Aisling Walsh got the go-ahead from the BBC to make his incredible and Inspector Calls into a BBC movie. Oh, I was so excited. And I think Aisling Walsh, she did a fantastic job making an Inspector Calls into a movie. It's now on BritBox, for example, if you would like to see it. If you've never seen it, I really, really recommend it. It's one of my favourite movies of all time. It is a classic crime film, but it is a crime film that really explores crime as a social phenomenon. We're still responsible for what we do. Don't take me the wrong way. We are responsible for what we do. I support the judicial system completely. But J.B. Priestley, he was interested in crime as entertainment, just like Agatha Christie. But Priestley was interested in also, as a left of centre thinker and writer, Priestley was really interested in looking at crime as this complex social phenomenon and looking at what causes crime. What are the triggers? So yes, we're still responsible for what we do, but we'd also need to understand that the moralist's way of looking at crime is not sufficient. There is a lot more going on. So J.B. Priestley, wonderful writer, and I really recommend that movie, An Inspector Calls. If you want an absolute gem of a picture, I almost guarantee you'll select this movie as one of your top 10 of all time. It's that good. It's a fantastic picture. But as I said, my dream after doing the Indian Pacific, Australia's great, continental railway journey of 4 or 5 days. Oh boy, the Indian Pacific, the best time of my life. But my other really great dream would be to get on that Orient Express in Paris and make my way slowly to Istanbul. Oh boy. I guess I do have some regret too that I probably will never do that. I don't like flying, and now I really do try and live off the smell of an oily rag. I live off my writing essays, poetry, and reviews. Obviously, there's more money in review writing, but there's still not much. So I never have a lot of income. I do live off the smell of an oily rag. So I probably will never get, and I'm also just turned 60. So I am at that stage in life when you start thinking about, pondering, what you will do for the last time perhaps, and, maybe some of the things that you will never get around to doing. And probably for me, one of those things I will never get to do is walk into the British Library and the British Museum to explore Viking York. There are things that I probably won't get to do, unfortunately. Buy my own narrowboat and explore the canal system. Get to the Scottish Highlands and explore the country of Clan Gordon. These are things I probably won't do. I travel vicariously. So one of the things I have done recently is buy a lot of books. This beautiful thing you can see with the wonderful cross from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. And you open it up, you can see as another magnificent treasure from the Folio Society. This book called Byzantium by Judith Herrin. This is a magnificent book. Look at the mosaic from the Eastern Orthodox tradition on the cover. Oh, it's just magnificent. Opens beautifully in the hand. It's fully illustrated with the most magnificent full-page colour photographs. It's just an astounding book, this. Judith Herrin, she really specialises in ancient Constantinople, moving through to Byzantium in the Middle Ages. So she's a real medievalist, I guess. So this book doesn't come right to today with Istanbul and with the, Istanbul as the capital of Turkey, Muslim Istanbul. This book really stops in the Middle Ages with that long decline and collapse of Byzantium. It's a beautiful book though. I love it. It's a beautiful read. It's very, very thorough, very detailed. Judith Herrin is an incredible medieval scholar. So this is, she's an UK medievalist. And this is a fabulous book. I really recommend it if you love medieval history. This is a joy to read. It's got several beautiful chapters on Hagia Sophia, that incredible cathedral in the heart of what used to be called Byzantium, now in Istanbul. It's a marvelous building with that incredible dome that was, of course, architecturally one of the great wonders of the world for, millennia. The dome of this cathedral was a great wonder. People didn't think it would ever stay up to the sheer weight of it. Architecturally, it really is a wonder of the world. And it does upset me that I won't get to ever see it. I'm going to have to read about it and travel to it vicariously. This is a fabulous book. Another book I've recently bought, to satisfy my obsession with Istanbul, Byzantium, Constantinople. This wonderful book by Bettany Hughes. Bettany Hughes is another United Kingdom historian. She specialises in ancient history, particularly to do with ancient Greece. But she's written this beautiful book on Istanbul because she spent a lot of time travelling to Turkey, exploring Turkey, and in particular, she loves Istanbul. So her book, Istanbul, A Tale of Three Cities, is a great celebration looking at, the ancient establishment of Constantinople, then looking at how Constantinople transformed into the great Byzantium, the great city of the eastern part of the Roman Empire, and the way Byzantium, for millennia was almost like the capital of Eastern Orthodoxy. A marvelous city. This is a wonderful celebration. You really can feel yourself walking through ancient Constantinople, then through the medieval times with Byzantium, and before we finally get transformed into the great capital city of Turkey, the great Muslim Istanbul. This is a marvelous book, just traversing 2,000 years of rich cultural history, all centered within the city limits of this wonderful city. An incredible city that is so culturally rich and diverse that it must have three great names. It's simply a city too big for one name. Constantinople, Byzantium, Istanbul. Oh boy, I will never get to see it, but I will travel there vicariously through these wonderful books and through novels and all sorts of other things. It's amazing. And of course, I couldn't have a video about traveling, even if it is vicarious travel. I couldn't have a video about traveling to Istanbul, the great Byzantium, Constantinople, without reading that wonderful poem of William Butler Yeats. Sailing to Byzantium. It's such a famous poem. It's in almost every anthology of modern poetry. So you're probably already familiar with this poem. But if you are not familiar with it, please don't turn the video off because I'm about to get poetic. I promise I'll read the poem really well and I think you will love it. This is a marvelous, marvelous poem. This is the sort of piece of literature you could not live without. By W.B. Yeats, Sailing to Byzantium. 1. That is no country for old men. The young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh or fowl, commend all summer long, whatever is begotten, born and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect. 2. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. Oh, don't you love that rhyme? 3. O sages, standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, Perny in Agaia, and be the singing masters of the soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fasten to a dying animal. It knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. 4. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from that natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make, of hammered gold and gold enamelling, to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium, of what is past or passing or to come. Oh boy. Sailing to Byzantium by the wonderful Irishman, by the wonderful, the sublime W.B. William Butler Yeats. What a poem. Oh, it's delicious. The use of alliteration, the end-line rhymes, the imagery, it's so dramatic. What a piece of writing. You could not live without it, could you? You could not live without it. So, this video has been about my travelling, my vicarious travelling to Istanbul, Byzantium, Constantinople. You know, in my imagination, I've already done it. I've travelled, explored the British Library and Museum, explored Viking York. I've got up to the Highlands to explore the clan country of Clan Gordon. I've explored the canals of England and Wales and Scotland. I've travelled over to Paris, boarded that magnificent train, the famous Orient Express, and I have made my own way, sailing across a continent, eventually coming to Istanbul, Byzantium, Constantinople. Oh boy, the vicarious journeying of the mind, or into the mind. I love it. Oh, Byzantium, it would be such a joy to travel with Yeats and find yourself in Byzantium, Istanbul. Oh, wow. So thank you for stopping by. I had a blast making this video and celebrating my love of vicarious travel. Thank you and bye for now. See ya.